Thank you all. I just have a brief statement and I'll take a couple of questions. And let me begin by offering my strongest, in fact, the strongest solidarity possible from the United States to the United Nations and its staff worldwide. We called for today's urgent meeting because of the Ethiopian government's reckless expulsion of 7 key UN officials, including the head of UNICEF, the head of the UN OCHA, and a senior official from the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. These expulsions are an affront. They are an affront to the Council, they are an affront to the UN, and they are an affront to United Nations member states and our shared humanitarian principles. As I said in the meeting, there's simply no justification for these actions. The UN is impartial and neutral. These groups are conducting important human rights investigations, and they are delivering life-saving aid. UN personnel must be allowed to return immediately to conduct their urgent work, including trying to stop a potentially devastating and unnecessary famine. These are self-inflicted wounds, and they reflect how, more broadly, this is a conflict where Ethiopians are killing Ethiopians, where Ethiopians are raping Ethiopians. It is Ethiopia's leaders who are letting down the Ethiopian people. 3 years ago, we were talking about Ethiopia as one of the fastest growing countries in Africa, a country full of promise and on the cusp of a major democratic and economic transformation. We were excited because Ethiopia looked like it might become the bedrock of Africa's optimistic future. 1 year ago, or a little less, we were told that the current situation would be a 2-week law enforcement action. Now we're talking about terrible violence. We're talking about mass famine, rape being used as a weapon of war. And I want to make something clear. It is not too late to stop this descent. It is not too late to prevent the famine, to get Ethiopia back on track, to save lives. There is still hope. We need a ceasefire that brings all parties to the table to find a peaceful way forward so that Ethiopians can return to the future we know it can have and that its children deserve. The government needs to allow for the resumption of services to northern Ethiopia. There will be no lasting peace in Ethiopia, and the country's broader project of democratic and economic renewal will not be realized until there is a wider dialogue, one that includes all Ethiopians, on the future of that state. It is time for Ethiopian leaders to do the right things for the people of Ethiopia. Thank you. I will take a couple of questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Ambassador. Michelle Nichols from Reuters.
Hi, Michelle.
Given what we just heard in the Council from some of your colleagues, it doesn't look like any Council action is imminent. So what's the US planning to do? Are you going to impose sanctions soon on Ethiopia? And if I could, just on Afghanistan, we heard earlier from the Afghanistan director of WFP warning about the collapse of the Afghan economy if there's no sort of injection of cash. What is the US doing to try and kickstart the Afghan economy? Thanks.
Well, first on the question of Ethiopia, I think the fact of the Council meeting today and speaking directly to the Ethiopians was an action. And believe me, it was not an action that was easy to take, but we were able to bring the Council together in unity to speak about the situation in Ethiopia and have the Secretary General speak about the situation in Ethiopia. And we called upon the government to reverse its decision, and we called on the government to move forward on a ceasefire and look for a way forward. In terms of the United States, we do have tools at our disposal. You may have noted in my statement, I suggested it could be that we do a resolution But also, as you know, the President signed an executive order a couple of weeks ago that gives us the possibility of putting sanctions against individuals for gross violations of human rights and blocking of humanitarian assistance. And that is available for our use when we need it. On the situation in Ethiopia, it is not the U.S. government's responsibility, but we have to work together as the international community to find a way to support Afghanistan moving forward. But I also will add that it is also the responsibility of the Taliban to provide an enabling environment that allows for the world to provide them with that assistance. We continue to provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, and we have worked to find ways around the sanctions regime to ensure that humanitarian assistance continues to flow into the country. And we will look forward to working with others in the international community to see what we can do to support the people of Afghanistan moving forward.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. Can I ask you about the new allegations that were made there by the Ethiopian ambassador to justify the expulsions? He said that UN officials had inflated and falsified data, even made up deaths. What is your response to those allegations?
You heard what the Secretary General said in response to those allegations. It's our first time hearing them. The Secretary General asked for evidence. He asked for evidence that the Ethiopian government had brought any of these allegations to the attention of the United Nations, and none of us have seen that. And as a UN Security Council member and a UN member state, we too want to see those allegations and to see where they're coming from. And the fact that you noted they are new allegations, they weren't even lodged prior to the 7 individuals being kicked out, raises some concerns in my mind about those.
Thank you. That's all we have time for today.
Thank you.
I wish to warmly welcome the Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and give him the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I welcome this opportunity to brief you concerning the situation in Ethiopia. In August, I warned the Council that a humanitarian catastrophe was unfolding before our eyes in Ethiopia, and since then, the crisis has worsened. Up to 7 million people in Tigray, Amhara, and Afar are now in need of food assistance and other emergency support. This includes more than 5 million people in Tigray, where an estimated 400,000 are living in famine-like conditions. Humanitarian aid is still not reaching the area at anywhere close to the levels needed. The only option for road transportation into Tigray is along the Afar corridor, where movements are being severely restricted by official and unofficial checkpoints, insecurity, and other obstacles and challenges. Some minor improvements that are welcome did not change the fundamental nature of the problem. Vital food supplies continue to be blocked, as are essential medicines and equipment. Humanitarian organizations continue to lack the cash they need to operate and to pay their staff. Access to electricity remains precarious. Millions of people are cut off from communication networks and vital services such as health care. And fighting in Amhara is another serious impediment to humanitarian access. As a result of all these facts, life-saving humanitarian operations are being crippled. Our colleagues on the ground are sharing increasingly alarming eyewitness testimony of the suffering, including growing accounts of hunger-related deaths. And in locations where screening has been possible, we are seeing acute malnutrition rates that remind us of the onset of the 2011 Somalia famine. We are also seeing deeply worrying reports of violations of human rights abuses perpetrated by all sides. I am particularly concerned about chilling accounts of violence against women and children, including sexual and gender-based violence. Mr. President, the UN is also actively engaged in humanitarian support to other regions of Ethiopia with pressing needs. The country is facing an immense humanitarian crisis that demands immediate attention. All efforts should be squarely focused on saving lives and avoiding a massive human tragedy. This makes last Thursday's announcement by the government of Ethiopia to expel 7 senior UN officials, most of them humanitarian staff, particularly disturbing. This unprecedented expulsion should be a matter of deep concern for us all, as it relates to the core of relations between the UN and member states. As expressed in the note verbal to the Mission of Ethiopia from the Office of Legal Affairs and shared with the Council a few days ago, and I quote, "A declaration by a state that an official of the United Nations is persona non grata, accompanied by a request or demand that the Secretary General consequently relocate that official out of its territory, is not consistent with the Charter obligation and is inconsistent with the fundamental principles of the International Civil Service enshrined in the Charter." The procedure on such matters is clear. As the note verbal states, if the government has any specific issues concerning any individuals, the relevant information should be brought to the attention of the United Nations to enable the Secretary General to make a decision as to whether any appropriate actions should be taken. In other words, there is a proper, formal procedure, and that procedure was not followed. The United Nations will continue to play its mandated role and work with the government of Ethiopia and with local and international partners to support millions of people in need of humanitarian assistance in Tigray, Amhara and Afar, and across the country, in full accordance with UN Charter and General Assembly Resolution 46/182. I now call on Ethiopian authorities to allow us to do without hindrance and to do this without hindrance and to facilitate and enable our work with the urgency that this situation demands. This means ensuring that visas for incoming personnel from UN entities and from our partners are issued quickly so that we can augment our capacity. The delays we have witnessed in the recent past are another obstacle to effective humanitarian aid. It also means that personnel inside the country are treated with dignity and respect as they carry out their vital work. Our focus remains on ensuring humanitarian assistance to every Ethiopian who needs it. We must save lives and restore livelihoods. I urge the government to allow the unrestricted movement of desperately needed fuel, cash, communications equipment, and humanitarian supplies into all the regions in need. And I appeal to all members of the Security Council to do all they can to support these calls and to unify behind the efforts of the United Nations and its partners in Ethiopia. Last August, in this Council, I called for action on several fronts. As I said then, and I quote, "All parties must immediately end hostilities without preconditions and seize that opportunity to negotiate a lasting ceasefire. Foreign forces should leave the country. Unrestricted humanitarian access to all areas in need must be guaranteed, and humanitarian workers must be respected. Public services must be re-established." This appeal is even more pressing today. Any further escalation of the conflict would only make the situation more tragic. Mr. President, important political events have taken place in Ethiopia since my last Security Council briefing in August. Just 2 days ago, a new government of Ethiopia, led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, has inaugurated. The mandate conferred by the election carries a responsibility to unite all Ethiopians, to focus on the future, to return Ethiopia to its place as a strong, unified, stable leader among the nations of the world. I encourage the newly inaugurated government to use this mandate and work with renewed determination to be a government for all. I welcome the Prime Minister's inauguration remarks prioritizing an inclusive political dialogue involving all segments of the community to resolve the ongoing challenges facing the country. I also note the many messages from African heads of state emphasizing the need for harmony, national unity, development, and peace. I urge all sides to grasp the peace initiative from the AU and His High Representative for the Horn of Africa, His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo. Without peace, the challenges facing Ethiopia will intensify and further destabilize the broader Horn of Africa region and beyond. We have an obligation to avoid such a dire outcome at all costs. Mr. President, dialogue is the foundation for peace. And peace is the foundation for a stable and prosperous future. Let us all work to help secure that future for all Ethiopians and for the peoples of the region, and I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to the representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Congratulations on assuming your presidency for the month of October. I would like to convey Ethiopia's best wishes in the discharge of your responsibilities. I also thank our Secretary General. Mr. President, I don't want to hide my surprise in the convening of this meeting of the Security Council. We find it incomprehensible for this august body to discuss the decision of a sovereign state exercised within the domain of international law and sovereign prerogative. There have been several instances where governments had expelled UN staff and other diplomatic envoys for so many disclosed and undisclosed reasons. Did the Council ever meet to vindicate such a decision? Not to the best of our recollection. Mr. President, we truly hoped Council members would have the insight to leave this matter to the government of Ethiopia and the United Nations. At the outset, I would like to register our position that the government of Ethiopia is not under any legal obligation to provide justifications or explanation for its decisions. Excellencies, we are obliged to make reference to the basic norms of the United Nations and its humanitarian operations. The General Assembly resolution on guiding principles for humanitarian assistance, 46/182, provides the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national unity of states must be fully respected in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. The most fundamental element of the sovereignty of the state has to do with their prerogative to determine who enters, remains in, exists in their territory. When we appeal for support and work with the UN or other humanitarian operators, we have not foregone this fundamental right. Therefore, the government will continue exercising its due right and responsibility on monitoring and screening all humanitarian operators in Ethiopia. Any suggestion to the contrary is unacceptable. As to the legality of the decision, leaving the details aside, the UN itself can be quoted for arguing decisions of persona non grata apply to the UN as well. Mr. President, when it comes to the obligation of UN staff, the rules are unequivocal. Article 101, paragraph 3 of the UN Charter provides all staff members employed by the United Nations must have the highest standards of efficiency, competence, and integrity. In the context of humanitarian operations, integrity entails adhering to principles of neutrality, impartiality, humanity, and independence. It also requires respect for the laws and police power of the host state. Furthermore, They must respect the Code of Conduct of UN, which, among others, provides the following. First, UN staff shall neither seek nor accept instruction from any government or from any other source external to the organization. Second, staff members shall not use their office or knowledge gained from their official functions for private gain, financial or otherwise, or for the private gain of any third party, including family, friends, and those they favor. Third, staff members shall not communicate to any government, entity, person, or any other sources any information known to them by reason of their official position. These cardinal principles, for the safeguard of which UN staff enter a solemn oath and swear on their conscience, mean that in the presence of contradicting views, competing interests, political pressures, and all forms of temptation, the UN staff will remain neutral. In the presence of deceit, coercion, and vested interest, they will preserve their independence. And in the existence of consideration that may appear to be reasonable basis for decision, UN staff will be guided by humanity only. The UN staff, Ethiopia expelled, sidelined their oaths, the rules of professional conduct, and the principles of humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, let me cite few examples among the multitude of transgressions that we selected with great care and caution. Needless to say, the misconduct of few individuals doesn't speak to the professional and able team of the UN in Ethiopia or anywhere else. Rather, it speaks of the serious ethical dilemma that existed in the humanitarian operation in Ethiopia for the past 11 months. These individuals executed the conspiracy created by TPLF and its member to generate an image of extreme casualty that warrants quote-unquote humanitarian intervention and rescues the criminal group. To use their own words, they were looking to create a Darfur-like situation. They suddenly and overnight created 1 million victims of health disaster, while OCHA country office reports 2.8 million people that need emergency health assistance. The main OCHA office was made to report 3.8 million, only because that level of inflation of misery was needed to elevate the crisis to level 3. They categorized the situation in Tigray under IPC 5, based on data collected from a region of 6 million population by a single FAO staff and interpreted by 2 UN staff that are Ethiopian and open TPLF supporters based in Rome. They assisted in fabrication of false allegations submitted to the UN Security Council as a white paper. The white paper contained unfounded allegations, including the use of hunger as a weapon, and preferred the need to apply Resolution 2417/18. The former head of OCHA was made to report to this council 152 Ethiopians died due to food shortage, while such incident had never occurred. They made up the data and went to the extent of disinforming this global security body. About 2 weeks ago, they reported 12 individuals died of hunger in an IDP camp, while the organization running the IDP camp, an internal organization itself, came out and stated the allegations are simply false. They implored UN agencies to conduct investigations outside of their mandate to meet the instruction of TPLF to generate exhibits matching the false allegation released on medias and to supposedly substantiate a case before the ICC. They didn't even show mercy to victims of gender-based violence. First, in violation of the protection of protocols of safe houses for victims of gender-based violence, they invited TPLF armed men and militia to the safe houses. In addition, they exposed the safe house before an international media and invited interviewers and interrogators to safe houses to intimidate victims and elicit testimonies. This, Mr. President, is happening in a city where close to 13,000 detainees and prisoners were released with absolute impunity, and thousands of armed youths are roaming in the streets, already creating terror on residents. These individuals recorded a UN staff meeting and gave a copy to TPLF for the sake of providing it with material it could use to back its false allegations. These individuals openly celebrated and make other UN staff cheer the so-called victory of TPLF and the withdrawal of the National Defense Forces from Tigray. They openly conducted activism in support of TPLF, a group proscribed as terrorists, and make political statements that instigate violence and inflame the conscience of the Ethiopian public. They assisted siphoning food, medicine, communication equipment, all other essential supplies and equipment and transfer to TPLF. Right before their expulsion, they were facilitating the deportation of ethnically segregated group of Ethiopian migrants from Saudi Arabia and their resettlement in third country in Africa for training and preparation before they join combat with TPLF. In effect, a parallel UN operation that completely sidelined the UN country office was created. Apart from the selfish interest of individuals, we have evidences that the entire endeavor is created by a higher and more sophisticated motivation that seeks to undermine the Ethiopian state and rescue the TPLF. Ethiopia deeply resents this experience. Mr. President, expulsion was not our primary course of action. In multiple occasions, we explained our concern to UN officials. On July 8, 2021, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Ethiopia wrote a letter to the UN Secretariat explaining in great details the misconducts of the UN staff that require corrective measures. We also summoned some individuals and warned them to halt their misconduct. Nevertheless, the transgression continued unabated. Mr. President, we believe the UN agencies and their honorable role are undermined by these few individuals. Our request from the United Nations is, first, to deploy new staff that are aware of and will adhere to their professional code of conduct. Overwhelming majority of UN staff fulfill this requirement and would distance themselves from political mercenarism. The government of Ethiopia stands ready to assist expeditious deployment of the replacement. More importantly, we request the UN to review all the reports, statements, and assessments that were produced on the situation in Ethiopia in the past year. These reports and data and information they contain must be verified. This audit is necessary for us to build and sustain trust and advance the exemplary cooperation between the Ethiopian government and the United Nations. Mr. President, the United Nations is an invaluable development and humanitarian partner for Ethiopia for many years. I want to underscore the great values we attach to the support of our organization during this difficult time. We also believe majority of the UN staff we have the privilege of working with have the requisite integrity and decency. Mr. President, I would like to reassure this Council the new Ethiopian government established with the popular will and mandate of the Ethiopian people to herald peace and prosperity stands ready to work with the international community to address long-standing and current challenges. We welcome and value initiative by leaders of our region, the African Union, and the support of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres toward sustaining peace and stability in Ethiopia. We assure you that we will facilitate the visa requests. No one should doubt the Ethiopian tradition of hospitality. What we ask is respect, dignity, and honesty, open and candid discussion. We will, as we did in the past, we will always stretch our hands to all those who treat us with dignity and equality. That is indeed the story of an Ethiopian life since the time of the League of Nations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia for his statement and invite the Secretary General of the United Nations to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If there is anything I have cherished during all this period, is to maintain a very effective and operational relationship with the government of Ethiopia and with its Prime Minister. To the effect that I had many criticisms in the global media about that, accusing me of being biased in favor of the Ethiopian government. So it is with total, I would say, in a spirit of complete easiness, that I would like to ask you one thing, Mr. Ambassador. If there is any written document provided by the Ethiopian government to any UN institution about any of the 8 members of the UN that were expelled, I would like to receive a copy of that document, because I have not had any knowledge of any of them, and it would be very useful for me to detect if documents are given to the UN and not given to my knowledge. Then I have to investigate what has happened in my organization. So I ask you, please, Mr. Ambassador, to provide me as a copy of any of the written documents written by the government of Ethiopia about any of the 8 that were expelled by Ethiopia in this regard. And I would recall that twice I told the Prime Minister that if there were concerns about lack of, I'd say, lack of impartiality of the UN staff, that I asked him, please send me those situations for me to be able to investigate. Twice I asked it to the Prime Minister. Until now, I had no response to these requests. And so, for us, the question is very simple. We believe that Ethiopia has not the right to expel these 8 members of the UN. We believe Ethiopia is violating international law in doing so. And we are ready to cooperate with the government of Ethiopia in relation to any situation in which the government of Ethiopia feels that any member of the UN is not behaving in total impartiality, in total independence, as humanitarian law prescribes and humanitarian principles establish. I want to tell you, Mr. Ambassador, we want to cooperate with the government of Ethiopia because we have only one agenda in Ethiopia, and that agenda is the people of Ethiopia. Tigrayans, Amarans, Afaris, Somalis, the people of Ethiopia. The people of Ethiopia is suffering. We have no other interest but to help stop that suffering. Thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his further clarification. The representative of Ethiopia has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, I hear you loud and clear. I fully understand and realize the support you have given to our people and my government as well. We know where your heart is. You have approached our issue with candidness, with candor, and we highly respect that. As to the asks, I will definitely communicate to the appropriate authorities, and we will, of course, expeditiously, and as I have made it clear in my statement, this is an issue that has to be dealt between Ethiopia and the United Nations. Whatever document that will be available will be submitted to your office, Your Excellency. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia for his statement.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, the United Nations has no political agenda in Ethiopia. our agenda is just one: to support the Ethiopian people, Tigrayans, Amarans, Afaris, Somalis, that have suffered so much. We cannot see people go on dying because of bullets or dying because of hunger. We need to do everything to stop this conflict. We need to do everything for humanitarian aid to be distributed everywhere, to everybody. We need to do everything for a dialogue to be established among Ethiopians to solve the problems in Ethiopia. Now, in this context, I was, of course, deeply shocked with the fact that 7 members of the UN had been expelled from Ethiopia and declared persona non grata. We had the occasion to explain why this, in our opinion, is not in line with international law. But on top of that, because so many accusations are appearing, today I asked the ambassador of Ethiopia to provide me with any copy of any written document given by the government of Ethiopia to any UN entity in relation to wrongdoings of any of these 7 members of the UN. And if such a document will be provided, we will, of course, immediately do an investigation why it did not come to my attention. Thank you very much.
Secretary General, we've never seen you do a right of reply ever in the Security Council that I can recall. Is this an expression of the level of your displeasure at the moment with the Ethiopian?
It's my duty to defend the honor of the United Nations.